They shot this image of a suspect and recorded his voice.
Were you on the bridge?
I told them I was on the bridge. I went out to the first trestle.
Oh, okay.
That first
I
thing.
don't remember you telling me that.
It's all right, babe. I love you. I didn't murder anybody. I didn't help somebody murder anybody.
February 13th, 2017 began like any other quiet Monday in Delphi, Indiana. The snow had melted just enough to leave muddy trails along the Monon High Bridge, where 13-year-old Abigail Williams and 14-year-old Liberty German often hiked. They were inseparable, best friends since childhood, always laughing, always exploring, always planning their next adventure. That afternoon, Kelsey German, Liberty's older sister, dropped the girls off near the trail. They waved goodbye, backpacks slung over their shoulders, unaware that this would be the last time anyone would see them alive. At 2:07 p.m., Liberty snapped a photo of Abigail on the bridge and posted it online, a seemingly ordinary moment, frozen in time. When the girls failed to meet Liberty's father at 3:15 p.m., worry turned to panic. Families rushed the area, calling out names, scanning the tree line, hearts pounding. By 5:30 p.m., the police were involved, but the town's tight-knit community was already gripped by fear. Parents whispered prayers, neighbors coordinated searches, and a collective unease settled over Delphi. The innocence of that town, its sense of safety, had been shattered. Families faced the unthinkable. And my opinion, in that moment, the ordinary became tragic, and a quiet town would never be the same again. When Abigail Williams and Liberty German were reported missing, the initial response from law enforcement was methodical but cautious. At first, authorities treated it as a standard missing person case. The girls had vanished in a familiar area, and officials hoped for a simple resolution. Delphi is a small town. Such events are rare, and the idea that something violent could occur there seemed almost unthinkable. By the evening of February 13th, local police, joined by state officers, began scouring the trails around the Monon High Bridge. Volunteers and family members combed the surrounding woods, calling out the girls' names. The urgency increased when the first night fell without any sign of them. Every moment mattered. The community was on edge, but investigators reassured the public that they were following protocol. 2 days later, Indiana State Police released a still image from Liberty German's phone. It captured a man walking on the Monon High Bridge, hands in pockets, head down. Dubbed the Bridge Guy, this figure immediately became the prime suspect. The grainy photograph, while unclear, offered the first glimpse of the person authorities believed was connected to the disappearance. Police emphasized that the image had been obtained from Liberty's smartphone, highlighting her presence of mind in capturing what could become critical evidence. Alongside the image, an audio recording surfaced. In it, a voice, muffled but distinct, said, "Down the hill." The release of this recording further confirmed that the girls had encountered someone before their deaths. Investigators were careful in their messaging, noting that these materials had been extracted from Liberty's phone, but that additional evidence would remain confidential to avoid compromising the case. Tips and leads poured in from the public. Witnesses reported seeing vehicles parked unusually near the trail, strangers loitering, and other anomalies in the area. Authorities documented each tip, establishing a timeline of events that, on paper, seemed thorough. They issued composite sketches, urged anyone with information to come forward, and maintained a visible presence in the town. Early statements from police gave the impression that the investigation was under control. Media updates, press conferences, and official briefings reassured the public. Delphi residents were told the case was being handled methodically, that law enforcement was following every lead, and that they were leaving no stone unturned. For the outside world, the narrative was clear. The girl's disappearance was being taken seriously, and a suspect had been identified. Yet even in these early stages, cracks were forming in the story the public was given. Witness accounts sometimes conflicted, minor details went unverified, some tips were delayed in reaching investigators, and while the official timeline seemed complete, gaps existed, moments when the girls' exact whereabouts and interactions remained uncertain. The community clung to the belief that authorities had the situation under control. Parents, teachers, and neighbors looked to police for guidance. Press releases emphasized diligence, and the ongoing search was portrayed as exhaustive. But my opinion, while the official narrative created a sense of order, it masked the subtle but consequential oversights that would later prove pivotal. It is important to understand that the perception of a fully managed investigation does not always match reality. The Delphi case, in its earliest stages, demonstrates this tension. Police followed established protocols, collected evidence, and engaged the public. They presented a timeline, identified a suspect, and maintained communication with families. To outsiders, the case appeared to be progressing steadily, offering hope that answers would come. But beneath the surface, small errors, missed connections, and misfiled tips quietly accumulated. These early oversights were not dramatic, they were administrative, procedural, but they would later form the foundation for the hidden clue that changed everything. In my opinion, the lesson here is subtle yet profound. Public confidence in law enforcement is built on trust and visible action. Yet even when a case appears managed, crucial elements can go unnoticed. The Delphi murders illustrate the delicate balance between perception and reality, a balance that would shift dramatically as hidden threads in the investigation finally emerged. The narrative at this stage was simple. 2 girls disappeared, a suspect was identified, and investigators were on the case. The public believed they knew the story. But what the authorities did not disclose, or initially overlook, would eventually rewrite everything the community thought they understood. As the Delphi investigation unfolded, the public believed they had a clear picture. The photograph of the bridge guy, the audio captured by Liberty German, the sketches released to the community, all of it suggested progress. Yet behind the scenes, a more complicated reality was taking shape. Something critical had been overlooked. A thread of the investigation was left hanging, unnoticed, misfiled, or dismissed. For years, the focus remained tightly on the prime suspect seen on the bridge and on corroborating witness accounts. Police emphasized the image and audio as the cornerstones of the case. But a single administrative error, a misfiled tip, would prove to be the key to unlocking the entire story. In 2017, a tip came in that Richard Allen had been on the trails the afternoon the girls disappeared. Due to a clerical mistake, his last name was recorded incorrectly. The tip was effectively buried, classified as cleared, and remained dormant for 5 years. It was not the first time an investigation like this had been hindered by human error. Law enforcement agencies handle thousands of tips in high-profile cases, and even minor missteps can have profound consequences. In Delphi, this oversight would delay the identification of a suspect, the collection of corroborating evidence, and ultimately justice for Abigail and Liberty. The existence of this missing clue raises questions about what else might have been overlooked. While the photograph and audio were widely circulated, the investigative files contained more. Witness statements that were never publicly released, reports of vehicles seen parked oddly near the trails, and subtle physical details at the crime scene that were never connected to the suspect. There were small fragments, footprints, clothing patterns, and other forensic details that individually seemed minor, but collectively pointed to the presence of someone deliberately concealing their actions. This hidden thread of evidence was compounded by the digital footprint of Liberty German's phone. Investigators recovered photos, audio, and other metadata, but much of it remained confidential for years. It hinted at more than what the public understood. There were gaps in the timeline, inconsistencies in witness accounts, and subtle physical evidence, all waiting for someone to connect the dots. And yet, at the time, the narrative presented to the public remained simple. 2 girls disappeared, a suspect had been identified in the photograph, and law enforcement was pursuing leads. Most citizens had no reason to doubt the thoroughness of the investigation. But the reality was more complex. Investigators, constrained by resources, cautious not to compromise the case, and unaware of the misfiled tip, were unknowingly overlooking a critical piece of the puzzle. In hindsight, the missing clue was not dramatic, not cinematic. It was administrative, almost mundane, but it was powerful. When finally rediscovered, it linked a suspect to multiple lines of evidence, witness statements, physical evidence, and digital recordings. It created a bridge between what was publicly known and what had been hidden in plain sight. In my opinion, this is the part of true crime that is rarely discussed, the quiet, unnoticed mistakes that ripple through an investigation. They are the gaps between perception and reality. They remind us that even when authorities seem to have the case under control, crucial evidence can remain dormant, waiting for the right moment to emerge. The Delphi murders had already captivated the nation, but this hidden thread, buried in the system for years, would eventually alter the entire trajectory of the case. It is a reminder that in every investigation, the truth is not always immediate, and justice is often delayed not by malice, but by oversight. As we continue, the story of this missing clue will become clearer, revealing not only the path to the suspect, but also the limits of human error and the persistence required to finally uncover the truth. The mystery, deep and unsettling, had only just begun to unfold. In the weeks following the disappearance of Abigail Williams and Liberty German, Delphi became a town on edge. Residents scoured the woods, volunteered for search parties, and anxiously watched the news. Amid the fear and uncertainty, law enforcement faced a flood of information, tips, eyewitness accounts, and observations from people who had been near the Monon High Bridge on that day. Some of these accounts were detailed, others vague or contradictory. One witness reported seeing a man walking along the bridge, hands in his pockets, seemingly alone. Another described a vehicle parked strangely nearby, positioned in a way that concealed its license plate. A hiker recalled a figure leaving the trails, muddy and disheveled, clothing stained and unusual for a cold February afternoon. At first glance, these details seemed small, disconnected, almost incidental, but together they formed a pattern that pointed to someone familiar with the area, a person moving deliberately, aware of how to avoid detection. Anonymous tips arrived from members of the public who did not wish to be identified. Some mentioned a man they remembered seeing on the trail days earlier. Others described a vehicle parked off the main road, in a place where it could easily go unnoticed. Police documented these tips, but not all were followed up with immediately. Some were misfiled, others simply shelved for later review. In one crucial instance, a tip regarding Richard Allen himself was recorded incorrectly, leading investigators to believe the information had already been addressed. In addition to overlooked tips, inconsistencies in witness accounts completed the investigation. Descriptions of the suspect's clothing, height, and movement varied. Reports of vehicles conflicted. Some placed a car near the abandoned Child Services building, others along County Road 300 North. These contradictions, while seeming minor, created challenges for authorities attempting to verify a timeline and identify suspects. The discrepancies also had an unexpected consequence. They delayed recognition of patterns that could have pointed towards Allen much earlier. For example, the description of a blue jacket and blue jeans matched multiple accounts, but was not initially linked to a single individual. Observers noted the odd parking of a vehicle, but this detail was treated as a side note rather than a potential lead pointing to a suspect's familiarity with the area. And yet, even with these gaps, certain threads were consistent. Multiple witnesses described a solitary male figure on the bridge. Multiple noted his movements were purposeful, almost deliberate. And though the details were scattered, they converged around a specific set of behaviors. The man appeared to be watching, waiting, and aware that the girls were vulnerable. This mixture of credible leads and inconsistencies formed the foundation for the clue that would later change everything. The evidence was always there, in fragments, waiting for someone to connect the dots. Law enforcement had compiled hundreds of reports, yet the key insight, the misfiled tip linking Allen to the trail on that day, remained buried. My opinion, witness accounts and tips are the bloodline of investigations, but they are also fragile. They depend on memory, perspective, and timely reporting. In Delphi, the human element both helped and hindered the case. People saw what they saw, but administrative errors and overlooked details created a blind spot that lasted for years. The contradictions, the ignored tips, and the scattered reports were not signs of negligence alone. They were evidence of the complexity of real investigations. They illustrate how small oversights can obscure truth, even when authorities seem to have the case under control. By carefully examining these reports now, it becomes clear that the pieces were always there. The hidden clue existed within them, waiting for a patient and thorough review. And as we will see in the next chapter, it was digital evidence, quietly preserved on a smartphone, that began to illuminate the path, connecting witness accounts to a tangible, undeniable trail of truth. The stage was set. Somewhere in that digital archive lay the clue nobody saw, a clue that would bridge gaps, connect contradictions, and finally point to the person who had shattered the lives of two young girls and their families. In 2017, Liberty German's phone was a quiet witness to the final hours of her life. Most people don't realize how much information a phone can store. Photos, videos, social media activity, search history, and even location data can reveal details invisible to the human eye. In the Delphi case, much of this evidence went unnoticed by the public and, at least initially, underutilized by investigators. The photograph Liberty took of Abigail on the Monon High Bridge was widely released. It seemed innocent at first, a simple snapshot of friends on a winter hike. But embedded in that photo and in the other digital traces on her phone were breadcrumbs that could have drawn investigators closer to the suspect years earlier. Cell tower data showed the girls' last known locations, confirming they were on the bridge at a specific time. Yet there were gaps, moments where data suggested unusual activity, moments that might have revealed the presence of someone else nearby, if cross-referenced properly. The audio recording, captured by Liberty just before the attack, offered another layer of insight. The voice on that recording, saying "down the hill," was muffled, faint, almost casual, but chilling in context. Authorities credited Liberty for her presence of mind, but in the months that followed, there was more to the phone than the single clip that became public. Metadata, location stamps, and even partially captured images existed that could have further narrowed the timeline and clarified who was in the area. Social media activity also played a subtle role. Posts made by the girls before and during their hike, interactions with friends, and their location tags painted a picture of routine, yet one that intersected briefly with the unknown man on the bridge. The digital record was impartial, indifferent, and complete in ways human memory is not. It preserved every step, every click, every image. And yet for years, much of this digital trail remained invisible to the public and underexplored in discussions of the case.
February 13, 2017 started like any ordinary day for Abigail Williams and Liberty German. They were dropped off on County Road 300 North near the Monon High Bridge at 1:30 p.m., excited for a brief hike before returning home. Liberty posted a photograph of Abigail at 2:07 p.m., capturing the girls walking along the bridge. That image, widely circulated, was the last confirmed sighting. From that moment until 3:15 p.m., when the girls failed to meet Liberty's father, there is a narrow window of time. Investigators relied on this period to reconstruct the girls' final steps. Witness reports suggested someone, a man later identified as Richard Allen, was on the trail at some point during that window. But there were gaps. The exact location of the girls during those 8 minutes, where Allen encountered them, and how he moved through the area remained uncertain. Some timelines suggested the suspect could have approached the girls, spoken to them, and left undetected. But conflicting witness statements made precise reconstruction difficult. One hiker saw a figure walking away from the bridge in muddy, possibly blood-stained clothing. Another reported a vehicle parked unusually near the Child Services building off Hoosier Heartland Highway. These details, though individually minor, were never fully integrated into the official timeline early on. By 5:30 p.m., the girls were officially reported missing. The police had initial accounts, but they relied heavily on early statements and visual evidence from the phone. Investigators did not immediately reconcile all reports, leaving gaps in their chronology. For example, the timestamps on Liberty's phone, combined with cell tower pings, indicated movement along the trail that was inconsistent with some witness observations. These inconsistencies created uncertainty about the suspect's exact movements and, crucially, where a hidden clue might exist. This gap in verification was critical. A misfiled tip in 2017 claimed that Richard Allen had been on the trail that afternoon. At the time, this tip was recorded incorrectly and dismissed. If investigators had cross-referenced it with witness accounts, the photograph, and digital evidence from Liberty's phone, they could have narrowed the timeline and potentially identified Allen years earlier. There were also small but telling details: footprints near the bridge, clothing impressions, and the location of an unspent .40 caliber bullet discovered between the bodies. These items were documented but not initially connected in a way that tied them to the suspect in real time. Each gap in the timeline represented a lost opportunity to link evidence, build suspicion, and take action sooner. In my opinion, timelines in criminal investigations are not just about hours and minutes. They are the skeleton of the story, supporting every lead, every tip, and every witness account. When even small segments are unverified, the entire structure becomes vulnerable. In Delphi, the unverified timeline allowed a critical clue to remain hidden, waiting for someone to revisit the evidence with patience and rigor. The failure to reconcile all the digital and physical data points left room for ambiguity. The combination of misfiled tips, fragmented witness reports, and overlooked forensic details meant that the public narrative suggested the investigation was straightforward, when in truth there were hidden complexities. By carefully reviewing cell data, phone metadata, witness statements, and physical evidence together, the real sequence of events begins to emerge. It is within these overlooked minutes, between the last photograph, the voice captured on Liberty's phone, and the earliest witness sightings, that the hidden clue would finally find its place. The timeline the police initially presented was orderly and reassuring, but beneath it lay uncertainty, contradictions, and the seeds of a breakthrough. The hidden clue, tucked within these small but crucial moments, was waiting to bridge the gap between suspicion and certainty. And when it did, it would change everything about how the Delphi murders were understood, investigated, and ultimately solved. The crime scene near the Monon High Bridge Trail was quiet, remote, and deceptively ordinary. At first glance, it seemed like a place children might visit on a hike, a location where footprints and the remnants of a day in the woods would naturally appear. But beneath the ordinary lay evidence that would become critical to solving the Delphi murders, evidence that was initially overlooked or buried in investigative files, largely unseen by the public. When the bodies of Abigail Williams and Liberty German were discovered, police collected items at the scene methodically. Clothing, personal effects, and the terrain were documented alongside environmental conditions like mud patterns and water flow near Deer Creek. Among these items was an unspent .40 caliber bullet found between the girls' bodies. On its own, it might have appeared incidental, a loose round left in the woods, but forensic analysis later linked it directly to Richard Allen's firearm, providing a tangible connection between the suspect and the scene. Other details were more subtle. Footprints in the mud suggested deliberate movements. Clothing impressions, displaced sticks, and disturbed soil indicated interactions that were not immediately clear. These pieces of physical evidence were meticulously catalogued, yet their significance in establishing a precise chain of events was not fully recognized at the time. Investigators had to balance caution with urgency, and in the process, some connections were not immediately made. The photograph and audio from Liberty's phone provided a partial account of the encounter on the bridge, but the physical environment held the rest of the story. Distances between objects, the positioning of the girls, and the location of personal items created a spatial map that, once interpreted correctly, highlighted the suspect's path and actions. It was a hidden layer of evidence, quietly waiting for the moment when the broader pattern could be reconstructed.
Even small recovered items carried weight. For example, minor debris, marks on clothing, and traces on the bridge itself could indicate the suspect's presence, physical struggle, or even the direction of movement after the attack. Individually, each element seemed minor, almost incidental, but together they formed a chain linking the scene, the timeline, and the suspect. In my opinion, crime scenes are like stories written in silence. Every detail matters, but humans cannot always read them immediately. The Delphi Murders demonstrate that even with diligent collection, some elements of the story can remain hidden until someone revisits the evidence with fresh eyes, a new perspective, or a crucial missing piece, like a misfiled tip, emerges. It's also important to consider the human limitations of initial investigations. Officers are trained to document thoroughly, but they are not omniscient. Physical evidence can be interpreted in multiple ways, and without corroborating data, witness statements, digital records, or later confessions, some findings remain ambiguous. In Delphi, certain pieces of evidence were collected and analyzed, but not fully contextualized until years later. This hidden physical evidence became a linchpin once investigators re-examined all materials in light of the overlooked tip pointing to Richard Allen. The footprints, clothing displacements, and the unspent round, when combined with digital and witness data, created a clear and undeniable connection. What had once seemed scattered or minor now fit together like a puzzle, revealing a pathway to justice. The lesson is stark. Physical evidence is not just what you see, it's what you interpret, cross-reference, and connect. In Delphi, the clues were present from the beginning, but until the missing thread, the tip that had been buried for years, was uncovered, the scene's true significance remained partially obscured. The bridge, the creek, the mud, the round, and the subtle disturbances in the forest were silent witnesses for years. Once understood, they told a story that no single photograph, video, or witness could convey alone. In my opinion, these hidden details remind us that in true crime, justice often depends as much on perspective and timing as it does on collection. The evidence was there. It had been hidden in plain sight. All that was needed was the right connection to bring it into focus. Richard Allen's presence on the Monon High Bridge Trail in February 2017 did not immediately draw attention beyond the photograph and later witness statements. At first glance, he appeared like any other local resident, familiar with the area, moving through familiar terrain. Yet once investigators began piecing together the timeline and revisiting old statements, patterns in his behavior began to emerge, small, almost imperceptible signs that, in retrospect, were profoundly disturbing. One of the earliest red flags was Allen's own reporting of his activities. 3 days after the murders, he approached a Department of Natural Resources officer to describe his presence on the trails. On the surface, self-reporting might appear responsible or cooperative, yet the content and timing of his statements, coupled with a lack of prior disclosure, raised questions. Why wait 3 days? Why report seeing 3 girls when only 2 were later confirmed missing? These inconsistencies suggested not only an awareness of the gravity of the event, but also a calculated attempt to manage perception. Witness accounts further painted a picture of unusual behavior. Several described seeing a man wearing a blue or dark jacket and jeans, moving deliberately along the trail. Some noted his clothing was muddy and stained, which seemed inconsistent with casual hiking. A vehicle observed nearby was parked oddly, almost as if it was attempting to obscure its license plate. Alone, each of these details could be dismissed. Together, they indicated intentionality, a deliberate effort to avoid scrutiny while still being present in the critical location. Interviews conducted years later, after Allen's arrest in 20...
For nearly 5 years, the Delphi murders remained unsolved. Authorities had the photograph, the audio recording, witness statements, and physical evidence, but one critical piece of information had quietly slipped through the cracks. It was neither flashy nor dramatic, but its impact would be profound. This was the misfiled tip from 2017 that would finally point directly to Richard Allen. The tip had arrived in the days after the murders. Someone, whose identity was initially redacted, reported that Allen had been seen on the Monon High Bridge trails on the afternoon the girls disappeared.
He allegedly claimed to have been present and described seeing 3 girls walking together, an inconsistency that at the time did not match the confirmed number of missing children. Due to a clerical error, Allen's last name was recorded incorrectly, and the tip was effectively buried. It was classified as cleared, never reaching investigators who might have acted on it immediately. The significance of this clue lay in its simplicity. Allen had already been on law enforcement's radar as a local resident familiar with the area. Witness reports, physical evidence, and digital data all hinted at a suspect moving deliberately, yet without a concrete lead. This tip, if recognized at the time, would have connected multiple threads: the photograph of the bridge guy, witness sightings of a man in blue jeans and a jacket, the oddly parked vehicle, and even the location of the unspent .40 caliber round. When the misfiled tip was rediscovered in 2022, its relevance was immediate. Investigators realized that it confirmed Allen's presence on the trail at the critical time, aligning with digital timestamps from Liberty German's phone and the recorded audio clip. Every piece of previously overlooked evidence suddenly fit into a coherent sequence. Footprints, clothing impressions, and witness sightings could now be attributed to a single individual, creating a timeline that bridged earlier gaps. In my opinion, what makes this clue so powerful is not just its content, but its invisibility for 5 years. It wasn't dramatic or sensational. It was quietly misfiled, lost in administrative processes. Yet it carried the weight to collapse years of uncertainty into clarity. It reminds us that in true crime, the simplest pieces of evidence, corrected names, overlooked tips, subtle digital markers, can have the most profound impact. This clue also clarified motive and opportunity. Allen's familiarity with the area, his deliberate actions along the bridge, and the way he positioned himself and his vehicle indicated premeditation. The misplaced tip tied him to the location at the exact time, showing that his presence was no coincidence. His later admissions in prison, coupled with this overlooked tip, confirmed that he had not only committed the murders, but had planned and executed them with knowledge of the terrain and the victim's movements. The discovery of the misfiled tip had a cascading effect. Investigators revisited witness accounts, reanalyzed digital evidence, and reassessed the physical crime scene. What had once appeared as isolated details, footprints, clothing impressions, and vehicle placement, now became a unified narrative pointing squarely to Allen. The clue transformed fragmented information into actionable evidence, turning suspicion into certainty. In my opinion, this is the defining moment in the Delphi case. It illustrates how small oversights can obscure the truth for years, and how meticulous review can restore it. The misfiled tip was not just a piece of paper, it was a key, unlocking the full sequence of events, connecting Allen to the girls, and ultimately changing the course of the investigation forever. The clue, hidden for years, became the bridge between mystery and justice. It answered questions, resolved contradictions, and aligned with every other piece of evidence collected over the years. It was, without exaggeration, the pivot point, the moment when the seemingly unsolvable finally began to yield its answers. And it proved, once again, that in true crime, justice often waits for the overlooked detail to be recognized, understood, and acted upon. When the misfiled tip linking Richard Allen to the Monon High Bridge trails resurfaced in 2022, it triggered a seismic shift in the Delphi investigation. What had been a cold, unresolved case for nearly 5 years was suddenly reopened with renewed intensity. Law enforcement had the advantage of hindsight, allowing them to revisit witness statements, re-examine forensic evidence, and cross-reference digital records with a clarity that had been impossible during the initial investigation. The reopening of the case was not simply about following a new lead, it was an opportunity to correct years of small missteps, oversights, misfiled tips, and unverified details that had allowed the investigation to stall. Police reviewed every piece of evidence through a new lens: Liberty German's smartphone metadata, the unspent .40 caliber bullet, witness accounts of the bridge guy, and Allen's own inconsistent statements. Each element, once considered in isolation, now converged to form a complete narrative that investigators had been missing. Public scrutiny played a significant role in the renewed investigation. The Delphi murders had captivated national attention from the beginning, and the community had never stopped asking questions. Families, neighbors, and online followers of the case repeatedly pressed authorities for updates. Their persistence, coupled with media coverage, kept pressure on law enforcement to dig deeper, ensuring that no tip, no matter how small or initially overlooked, went unexamined. The rediscovery of the misfiled tip became a turning point, showing that citizen involvement, when paired with meticulous investigative work, can be critical to solving even the most complex cases. The hidden clue also redefined the search for justice. With Allen now firmly placed at the scene, the investigation could move from theory to confirmation. The forensic team revisited the bullet, confirming its match to Allen's firearm. They reanalyzed footprints, clothing impressions, and disturbed terrain to align with the timeline suggested by Liberty's phone and witness observations. Every piece of physical, digital, and testimonial evidence began to reinforce the same conclusion: Allen was the perpetrator. In my opinion, reopening the case highlights an essential principle in criminal justice. No case should be considered closed until every thread has been fully explored. In Delphi, the misfiled tip was not evidence of negligence alone. It was a reminder of the fragile balance between thorough investigation and human error. The renewed focus allowed authorities to correct previous gaps, eliminate uncertainties, and build a solid prosecutable case. The comparison to past missteps is stark. Early investigative efforts were diligent, but constrained by miscommunication, unverified witness reports, and incomplete cross-referencing of digital and physical evidence. Tips were ignored or buried, timelines were assumed rather than verified, and minor contradictions went unaddressed. While law enforcement acted within protocol, these errors created delays that might have been avoided with tighter procedural oversight. Reopening the case also provided an opportunity to apply modern forensic techniques that were not fully utilized in 2017. Advances in digital forensics allowed investigators to extract additional metadata from Liberty's phone, while re-examination of the crime scene provided a more accurate reconstruction of the girl's last moments. This comprehensive approach ensured that no piece of evidence, no matter how subtle, was left unanalyzed. Ultimately, the hidden clue transformed the investigation from a stalled, unresolved case into a focused pursuit of justice. It allowed authorities to reconcile contradictions, validate witness statements, and definitively link Allen to the murders. In my opinion, reopening a case is not simply a procedural step. It is an acknowledgement that the truth often requires persistence, patience, and a willingness to revisit what was once considered settled. By reconnecting overlooked evidence, re-examining the crime scene, and applying modern investigative techniques, the Delphi Murders case finally moved toward resolution. The reopening was more than symbolic. It was a decisive act that ensured the victims' families and the community would have clarity and ultimately justice. The rediscovery of the misfiled tip in the Delphi Murders case was more than just a breakthrough in investigation. It carried profound legal implications. Evidence that had remained dormant for 5 years suddenly shifted the entire prosecutorial landscape. What was once circumstantial became actionable, and what had been a series of disconnected observations coalesced into a strong evidentiary foundation. In criminal law, the timing and discovery of evidence can directly impact charges and trial strategy. Early in the Delphi investigation, authorities lacked the ability to firmly tie Richard Allen to the trail on February 13, 2017. Witness accounts, physical evidence, and digital records suggested a suspect, but none of it could, on its own, establish his presence or intent beyond reasonable doubt. The misfiled tip, once corrected, provided that crucial link. It confirmed Allen's location on the trail, aligning with Liberty's photograph, the audio recording, and other forensic evidence. Suddenly, prosecutors could confidently argue that Allen not only had opportunity, but that his actions were deliberate and premeditated. This revelation also affected the potential for additional charges or adjustments to prosecution strategy. The unspent .40 caliber bullet, now clearly associated with Allen, strengthened the narrative that he brought a weapon to the scene, establishing both forethought and intent. Witness statements describing his clothing, muddy and possibly bloodied, no longer were isolated details. They corroborated his presence and actions. In the legal context, tying physical, digital, and testimonial evidence together in this way creates a coherent story for jurors, reducing